Hello, welcome to our second discussion of Passover. I was going to post this last night, but we're um, we're in the process of building, I guess, our home, um, and I was under the house most of the day yesterday, putting in plumbing lines, so I didn't get home or didn't get back here until late. So Yesterday we discussed the need to look within on Passover. Um, we're going to pick up at Exodus 12:14. We left off with Exodus 12:14, but I want to look at the first phrase in this. It says, "And this day shall become to you a remembrance." And this ties into what we talked about in the last lessons. The word for remembrance is zikaron, that means a reminder. This day shall be a reminder. This is a day that you bring things to mind. Okay, so if we discuss this looking within to bring up whatever yeast, whatever we have inside that we need to get rid of, then this is the day specifically that reminds us that we have to do this. Um, it's interesting. Um, we think of Passover as we're celebrating Passover. Um, we're not really celebrating Passover. We're celebrating the remembrance of Passover. There was only one Passover, and it was celebrated by the children of Israel when they left Egypt. The commandment is not to forget it, okay? And the commandment yields much more than that, in that it says, "This shall be a reminder to you to look within to discover what yeast you have, what deities are you making up in your life that you're holding on to." But we're going to kind of change gears today. We're going to talk about Yahusha within the Passover in this little study. Let's go on to 12:15. It says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Indeed, on the first day you shall cause leaven to cease from your house. For whosoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And on the first day is a special gathering. On the seventh day is also a special gathering. No work at all is to be done on them. Only that which is eaten by every being, that alone is prepared for you. Okay? So let's consider that the first day and the seventh day are what we would call high Shabbats. They're not the weekly Shabbat. Okay, we have the seventh day Shabbat that we observe from Friday evening to Saturday evening, but these are also called Shabbats, and that is something that we can consider, or we must take into account when we consider the death, burial, and resurrection of Yahusha. Okay, so Passover itself, the day that the lamb is slain and prepared, is not a day of rest. The day of rest comes after that, in the first day of unleavened bread. Okay, so Yahusha would have died. In other words, he would have been the Passover lamb presented by Elohim, and as the last legitimate high priest, he would have slain that lamb. In other words, he would have been put to death on Wednesday. Okay? Now, he was in the ground 3 nights and 3 days. So we have to take into account the Hebrew day, not our what we're accustomed to, that daytime starts in the morning and it ends when the sun goes down. The Hebrew day is from evening to evening. So he would have died on the day that the lamb is prepared. Okay? He would have been crucified, when the first lamb is brought in for the slaughter, and he would have died when the last lamb at the temple is slaughtered. And this is why he yells out, Nagmar, it is finished, at the same time that the high priest would have been slaying the last lamb and saying, it is finished. In other words, the lamb is prepared, the lamb is finished. We come into a kind of a tricky little thing that kind of misguides us in thinking, oh, well, he died on Friday because, remember, the Jews were in a hurry to get this done because they needed to get home and prepare for the Sabbath. Okay, remember, the first day of Pesach, the first day of unleavened bread, okay, the day after the lamb is put to death, is called a Shabbat. Okay, so he would have been put to death Wednesday, but he would have died and had to have been in the grave before Wednesday evening when that day of unleavened bread would begin. Therefore, he would have been in the grave Wednesday evening to Thursday evening, which gives us one night and one day. Okay, then he would have been in the grave Thursday evening to Friday evening, 2 nights, 2 days. And then from Friday evening to Saturday evening, 3 nights, 3 days. And he would have risen on the third day, which is Saturday evening to Sunday evening. Okay, so if we look at it in perspective, we understand that he would have risen after 3 nights and 3 days. The period of time when Shabbat, when this Passover would have been back in the day he died, fell exactly like this. Okay, Passover is not always on the same day every year. Now, he would have risen at first fruits, which is celebrated after the 7th day Shabbat during Pesach. Okay, so he would have died on Passover, been buried on the first day of unleavened bread, been in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. After the weekly Shabbat, which is Friday evening to Saturday evening, the wave offering is done, the first fruits are presented, and which would have been the day after the 7th day Shabbat, so on Sunday. So he would have been the first fruits of the resurrection in that case. But we have to look at Scripture. Even Brit Hadashah, it's erroneously called the New Testament. It's not a New Testament, it's a Brit Hadashah, is a restored covenant. Hadashah doesn't necessarily mean something that's new. It means something that has been made new, something that has been restored. And the restoration of the covenant was the restoration of the covenant between Yahuwah Elohim and the house of Israel, which is the northern tribe that would have been made possible by and through Yahusha. Remember, we need blood in a covenant. The two parties of the covenant shed their blood. Therefore, Yahusha, as a representative of both Elohim and Adam, was able to shed the blood to represent both aspects and thus restore a covenant that had been lost to the northern kingdom because of their desire to pursue idolatry. Remember, in Galatians, it says that if you are part of the circumcision, then Messiah does not profit you. And we take that to mean, oh, well, we've done away with all that Old Testament stuff. When we look at Galatians, we look at the circumcised and the uncircumcised, okay? The circumcised refers to the southern kingdom of the house of Judah. They're circumcised in that the house of Judah never fell out of covenant. They strayed, they committed chatat, they strayed off the path, but they never broke the covenant. Therefore, they remained circumcised. Yahusha did not die for them specifically to restore them back into a covenant. But the northern kingdom did stray, did go into idolatry. And we recall in Hosea and in Jeremiah both where Elohim says, you are no longer my wife, I'm no longer your husband, I divorce you, in order for them to be restored back into the covenant. Something would have to happen. Part of that restoration was that blood would have to be mingled on the altar in order for both parties to come back into covenant. Both of them were in slavery. In order to redeem a slave, 30 shekels of silver had to be paid to the temple. So when Judas Iscariot, the one who carries the money for the group, betrays Yahusha, he's given 30 shekels of silver or whatever that is. And when all this bad stuff happens to Yahusha, he says, oh, I can't take it. And he takes it back and he throws it at the feet of the high priest. So therefore he's paid the 30 shekels of silver to the high priest. And now both kingdoms can be restored from slavery, from bondage. The purpose of Yahusha was to bring both kingdoms back together. And the deeper analogy of this that we get from Bereshit, from Genesis 1:1, if we look at the Hebrew of that, we understand within the Hebrew, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Below that, when we look at the Hebrew, we see that the presence of the tabernacle, okay, John chapter 1 says, and the Word became flesh and built his tabernacle among us. The presence of the tabernacle has the authority through the truth, power, and the ability of Yahuwah Elohim to be a vehicle of sacrifice to restore a covenant. Okay, that's in the word Bereshit. If we look at that from the Hebrew and the Hebrew letters themselves, the meaning of the word uses the word resh instead of the word tehillah, which means authority as opposed to beginning. And this would be the authority to reunite the heavens, the kingdom of Elohim, back to the earth, the kingdom of the Adam. And this is played out beautifully in a historical event of the creation of Israel, the children of Israel, the breaking apart of Israel, and the putting back together of Israel to become the prince in Ezekiel. But anyway, Yahusha would have died on Wednesday, buried before Wednesday evening. He would have been in the grave Wednesday evening to Thursday evening, one day, one night, or one night, one day. From Thursday evening to Friday evening, 2 nights, 2 days. From Friday evening to Saturday evening, which is the 7th day Shabbat, 3 nights, 3 days. He would have resurrected, and he would be seen by the apostles for 40 days. Now that is an interesting thing too that we have to also take into account. But in order for us to understand why he was only seen for 40 days and not for 50, remember between between first fruits and Shavuot begins the counting of the Omar. That it's called the Feast of Weeks, 7 weeks, 49 days. It's a total of 50 days to Shavuot or Pentecost. Why was he only seen for 40 days? First of all, we have to understand that in Samuel, the children of Israel reject Yahuwah Elohim as king, and they want a physical king. So they get a physical king. Okay? We also read, and if we read it correctly, which means that we also have to read Hebrews correctly. Translations are all goofy when you try to take them out of one language, put them in another language, and then try to put them in another language. You lose translation. That it was actually Melchizedek that gave Abraham 10% of the spoils. Abraham refused to take the spoils So Melchizedek insisted that Abraham get 10%, okay? Abraham means the exalted father, that he was receiving back something. So when we look at Yahusha only being seen for 40 days, that this is a number for transition. 40 is a number for transition, okay? We have it rained 40 days or 40 nights that to take us from an evil generation to a restored generation. Moses in Pharaoh's court for 40 years to learn how to be a prince, and then 40 years in the wilderness to learn how to be a shepherd, to transition again. 40 days on Sinai to take them from being a people of slavery to a chosen people. Yahusha in the wilderness, 40 days to go from being a carpenter to becoming Messiah, the vehicle of sacrifice who would restore the covenant. So when he's seen for 40 days, there is a transition that is taking place. What is the transition that's taking place? Well, there's 10 days left until Shavuot falls. The 10 is the Yod, that is the root letter in the name Yahuwah, that also represents the power and the ability of Yahuwah. So, in other words, the transition from a physical king, Yahusha was the last physical king, and he dies. Now the transition takes place from a physical kingdom with a physical king back to the spiritual kingdom, the kingdom of the heavens, with Yahuwah being restored as the king. Yod has a numerical value of 10. So Yahuwah now is restored back to king of Israel, and the result, by proxy, he's the king of the world. When we say our blessings, we say Baruch atah Yahuwah Eloheinu Malech haolam. Blessed are you, Yahuwah, our Elohim, king of the world, king of the universe. Okay, king of eternity. So Yahusha now becomes the high priest in the order of Melchizedek, because again, when he dies, the last official, real, flesh and blood, Levitical high priest dies, slaying the Lamb of Elohim that removes chatat from the world. He removes the straying, he forgives the straying of the house of Israel and by proxy the house of Judah. So the restoration of the kingdom of heavens, the kingdom of Elohim, comes, and by proxy it is restored back to a union with the kingdom of Adam. And this is when the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit, falls on Shavuot, on Pentecost, that once again the Adam can be united fully with Elohim. So that's our little ditty on Passover for today. I will do my best to have another lesson this evening. It is Shabbat, so I don't have a whole lot else to do other than to study and to prepare. So I will get a lesson this evening. Until then, may Elohim bless you and keep you. I love you all, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.